So it's time for our next keynote speech, Two Thoughts on Racism in Hockey. Dr. Martin Washington is a man with an incredible resume. He's currently a professor at the Alberta School of Business at the University of Alberta. His research, teaching, and consulting focus are on processes of organizational and institutional change. He's the author of 3 books on leadership and organizational change, and he's worked with several countries, Botswana, Mexico, and several states in the USA. And over the past year, as the protests and movements such as Black Lives Matter and the growing awareness of the barriers to BIPOC people, Dr. Washington has shifted his focus to helping organizations move beyond simple measures to address diversity. So very eager to hear some of your thoughts and words, Dr. Washington. I'll let you take it away.
Excellent. Thank you. And like others have come before, I really want to acknowledge Grant McEwen for taking the opportunity to have a somewhat difficult conversation in some sense. To give you sort of the background for how this got started, a really good friend of mine, Kathy Phillips Williams, I went to graduate school with her. Her research really is on the difficulty of overcoming racism. That's her research. That's her passion. Unfortunately, she passed away about a year ago, but we were graduate students together, and I followed her work closely. A lot of my research looks at sport organizations, football, basketball, hockey, amateur Olympic sport organizations. And this is a place where sort of racism is exposed, if you will, partly because of the highly visibility of the players and because of the connections between the players and the fans and because it's readily written about in the media. And so I've been thinking about all of this in some sense, and let me sort of share some slides that's going to walk you through sort of my thoughts. The first slide I really want to talk about really gets at other sports. And I know this is about hockey, but we need to think about sports in context before I give you sort of my 2 thoughts. If you think about football, football is a fairly fascinating place because at one point the league would have been 100% white. And over the so many years of the league, it's been around in some version for maybe 100 years or so when you think of college sport and then professional sport of football. And now it's about 31% white. We could think about the quarterback in a position. If we had to identify an ideal type quarterback, it would have been the people on the screen, Joe Montana, Dan Marino. But in a relatively short order, one generation or so, we have quarterbacks that look extremely diverse. How about basketball? Basketball is an equally interesting sport, but for a different reason. Because this is a sport that would have been similar to football, 100% white in the beginning. And then there was this infusion of African Americans, mostly in the US, but diverse. But if you follow it, again, especially in Canada, the sort of Steve Nash revolution, if you sensed, it feels like the sport is accepting of players of all different backgrounds and colors, between the international players that come over to play, as well as the white Americans that come over to play. And of course, now I go to hockey. And hockey is 97% white. And I know you want to fight me on the percentages. Is it 97%? Is it 98%? Or is basketball 18% or 17%? That's not the point here. But the point is to talk about the sport is that it is extremely lack of diversity in a sea of sports that have a lack of diversity in some sense. And so what are my 2 thoughts? My 2 thoughts really go at what I would call the diversity equation. And so the first 2 pieces really explain why is diversity so hard? Why is it difficult for us as individuals, organizations, sporting clubs, businesses to really address in a productive way issues of diversity? Step 1, because as humans, we like to categorize things. As it is part of our human DNA that we look for, are you like me or not like me? Again, from an evolutionary standpoint, this is how we would have survived as cultures. We would have walked into places that were unfamiliar and looked for things that were friend or foe, flight or fright. Think about all these different phrases we have. So it seems like we basically walk around with this lens that says, are you in my group or not in my group? And then for many people, not in my group could be similar with threat. In my group could symbolize sort of cohesion or comfort. Now, here's the second part of this: similarity attraction. Those that are in my group, life in some sense is easier. Why is it easier? It makes communication easier. Let's take it off of a racism topic for a minute. If I have two engineers talking to each other, they have similar backgrounds, similar education, they can talk in all kinds of shorthand language until we bring in someone that's not an engineer. Often it's going to take longer to communicate. It's going to take longer to discuss. So now what does that mean? Now this extra time of communicating from a pure categorization and an attraction standpoint often puts us in a bit of a distance. Now, if that's general processes and general properties, what does that mean for sport organizations? Here's what I think it means. I think it's really become a bigger problem when the out group is really, really small. And so if the in-group and out-group is 50-50, 60-40, there are enough of the people in the out-group that you'll see that you'll run into your daily life. There are enough people that you'll experience with on a personal level, which makes it hard to treat them as out-group. We know this in some sense that when I think of people that are not like me, it's easy to categorize them if I have no familiarity, no interaction with them. But the more people that I think are not like me I interact with, the harder it is to keep them in an out-group category. And so in a space that's going to be 97% one culture, one race, and 3% other, that 3% other is going to always feel like an out-group because there may be people in the 97% that's never experienced them. Never had a African American or a Black or an indigenous or someone that's not the dominant group, player, coach, assistant coach, never been on a team with them. So to the degree I start with this in-group, out-group, no surprise, I can maintain this in-group, out-group all the way through. It's also a problem when success is based on superstition. And what do I mean by superstition? Math is something that is pretty direct and straightforward. 2 plus 2 will always equal 4. It's not 2 plus 2 is 4 if I'm in a good mood or a bad mood. It's not 2 plus 2 is 4 if I look like you but doesn't look like you. Running is something that's pretty straightforward. Here is a line in the sand, and we put a bunch of people on this line, and we draw another line someplace else and see who's the first to get to that line. Team sports don't really work that way. Team sports is a mixture of your ability to be a team member, your ability to have individual sports, individual skills, your ability to sort of interact with people. And so it's hard to identify the same technical components as if those are the only things that matter. Again, and I contrast this to math or to something like swimming or track and field. Because again, if it's track and field, you may not like me, I'm the first to get across the line. You may not understand me, I'm the first to get across the line. Now let's come to hockey. What actually makes you a great hockey player? We have lots of theories and lots of advices and lots of specifics, but think about the risk that's going to create in me when I'm putting that in the hands of someone who might look different from me. So I have a coach that doesn't look like how I think a coach is supposed to look. I have a player on my team that doesn't look like how I think that player is supposed to look. Now, in my mind, in some sense, I'm saying this person looks like my out group. They're not like me. I don't understand them, the similarity attraction hypotheses. And I have this superstition belief about success. And I don't mean superstition in the sense of it's made up. I mean superstition in the sense of it's not 100% guaranteed. No one would ever take a player and say, if you do these 6 things, I can 100% guarantee you'll make it to the NHL. And so if I can't guarantee that, there's a lot of hope and faith involved. So when I say superstition, I mean the hope and faith part of this. I think this is a problem. I think this as a problem leads to entrenched beliefs. It leads to entrenched understandings. It leads to positions that are hard to overcome because, in some sense, what's against us is the sheer lack of numbers with us. If this was a basketball story and we were talking about Canadians in basketball, we would first talk about Steve Nash, who sort of brought in the idea of the Canadian basketball player. And then we would talk about the existing amazing players that were from Canada, primarily Ontario, that now played NBA. So what did that do? That opened up this categorization conversation and opened up this similarity attraction. Kids that are Canadian said, oh, I see other Canadians that are like me. Steve Nash, other Canadians that look like me. I guess I can do that. Still may be as superstitious, since I don't know how to do that, but now the categorization argument or hypotheses, if you will, now the similarity attraction hypotheses gets broken down. So what's the solution to all of this? The first thing I think we can do is really think through success. Really begin to open up. When I think about what makes a good hockey player, how much of that is coded for different social categorizations? How much of that is coded for things that are similar to me? So I think this is good because I'm a good player. So I'm going to tell others, basically, if you want to be a good player, be like me. Well, I'm not sure if that's really what I should be saying. Again, I think through NFL. If you start with what makes a good quarterback in NFL, you would have started with Joe Montana and Dan Marino. They had to really open up. Is it look like them? Is it act like them? Or is it to have certain skill sets that make your team win? Until they got to the idea of there are skill sets that make your team win, you could then open up and get beyond the social characteristics of the players. So I don't have to look like Joe Montana or Dan Marino. I don't have to act like them. I just need to be able to make the throws. I need to be able to lead a team. And the way I might lead a team, Kyler Murray, the way I might lead a team, Russell Wilson, might be totally different than how Joe Montana or Dan Marino might lead a team. Once we start thinking through success differently, it really will open up a way for us to challenge sort of social categorization and social attraction. What's another thing you can do? Listen and sponsor. Because it's 97-3, there are lots of times where the minority on the team, this might be the first time others have played with a minority. And so if I've never experienced this, I actually can't say whether or not what you're telling me about your feelings or your thoughts or how you're being treated is right or not. But so often we want to get into the judging point. And when a person comes and tells you about an experience, we say things like, well, that's not true. Well, that didn't really happen. If George Floyd taught us anything in 2020, it's in some sense, the fact that you don't see it doesn't mean it's not true. The fact that you haven't been around to experience it doesn't mean that it's not true. So because of that, maybe what you can actually do is listen when somebody tell you about their experiences. Maybe you can listen to the person that says, you know, I don't think this coach likes me because they do blah, blah, blah. And then to go beyond listen, what if you sponsored? What if you actually spoke on behalf of? I love the conversation in the beginning where it was the person made a comment about my name, but I didn't really want to say something, but someone else spoke up. That's sponsor. To go beyond just listening to this, but to the degree you are like the dominant group, you can say something to this. How about go beyond sponsor into champion? It isn't just enough to say, we want to listen to you, the minorities in the room. We want to sponsor you. We're going to champion this cause because this is the third part of the diversity equation. It is 100% known today that diverse groups perform better. We know this in business. We know this in organizations. When you have a diverse set of people in a room, however you measure the diversity, engineers, non-engineers, women, men, minorities, dominant culture, however you measure it, If you have a diverse set of people in the room, decision making is better. Why? Because the diverse set of people in the room bring more information. The more information they bring, the more you're likely to discuss that information. The conversation is richer, you get to a better outcome. Awesome. So if you will benefit from the diversity in the room, the question for you might be, am I championing to get diverse people in the room? I'll stop sharing there. I know we've been sort of over time a bit, and so that's my attempt to sort of get us back on schedule. So more than willing to sort of get us back and have any questions or answer any questions if you have any.
All right, that is some really amazing points that you had to make there, Dr. Washington. I love how you talked about how we don't have to look like those players. We just need to have the skill set. And I can tell from the chat that so many people have been enjoying and learning from what you had to say. One of the questions that came up that is actually, I think it's an important one. No question is a bad question. And maybe in your words, Dr. Washington, if you could briefly explain, someone asked a question here. Can you explain why diversity is so important to those who may question why it is even important in the first place?
Yeah, and this is really because of the idea of increased information, increased conversation. Think about, in some sense, and this happens in just about every sporting context, try out for the team. So you have an all-star team, you have a special team. Well, I'm a coach. Why not just have me pick the kids on my team? Well, as soon as you have another person in the room, now you have more information when we discuss each kid. What if you have 4 people in a room with different perspectives, different backgrounds? Now we have more information to actually discuss the kid. If we spend the time discussing the information that we have, will lead to better outcomes. So often what happens is people don't want to spend the time. Social categorization, social attraction. And so I know what the answer is. Why go ask this other person their opinion? Well, then we never get the benefit of this. The benefit is the increased information from our different perspectives. This occurs regardless of the activity. It could be boardroom decisions. It could be evaluating students in the classroom. And I think it could also be performing in a sport.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Marvin Washington, for your words, for your research, for everything you're doing for people of color. It is just fantastic to see. We appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone who's asked questions in the chat, and same scenarios before. We'll try to make sure you get those answers to those questions later. And also some of the breakout sessions that will be happening later on after the second intermission of today's summit will be, it'll be an opportunity to kind of dive into these topics more, and an opportunity to engage more. So that's the end of this first keynote speech that we had. 2 thoughts on racism in hockey. Thank you so much, Dr. Marvin Washington.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll see everyone in the next room.